Hi, I'm Rosanna Vargas Forbes, and welcome to episode 146 of Art This Week. In this episode, we visit the Nasher Sculpture Center and speak with Assistant Adjunct Curator Catherine Kraft about their latest exhibition, Rediscoveries, Modes of Making in Modern Sculpture. Now for Art This Week.
So can you tell me, how did this exhibition materialize?
Well, what we're looking at up here in the upper floors is actually an installation of the permanent collection. Mm-hmm. And normally we would install things chronologically or group it by artists. Mm-hmm. But Chief Curator Jed Morris and I decided to try to play with thematic groupings. Mm-hmm. And we've developed 4 themes that touch on different aspects of artists' process. The title of the exhibition is Rediscoveries, Modes of Making in Modern Sculpture. Mm-hmm. And it's taken from a comment that Auguste Rodin made, "I invent nothing, I rediscover." And I think it's a very useful thing to keep in mind because we so often associate modern and contemporary art with invention and the new and discovery and shock. And artists look at art. They look at what they're doing in the studio, at their materials and process and ideas, and they look at what other sculptors have done as well. And one of the things that resulted from thinking that way is taking works from the collection that seem to be engaging certain ideas. We're standing right now in the room for one of those ideas, which is everyday objects. Artists in the last 100 or so years have been very inspired by things as simple as chairs or typewriter erasers, or in this case, this is a suite of lead reliefs by Jasper Johns that depict everyday objects, such as toothbrushes and a slice of bread. All of the works in this section are inspired by, ultimately, the work of Marcel Duchamp, who invented an object called the ready-made. And the idea of the ready-made is basically that an artist can take an object from the outside world. It doesn't matter if he's done anything to it or not. And by just sort of the force of his decision or adding a new thought to that piece, he can designate it a work of art. And that really opened up artists' possibilities, especially for sculpture. It let in sort of the world of objects into the world of sculpture. We've got in this gallery 2 other themes. One is the machine aesthetic, and in the larger area in between is part and whole, or fragment and totality. Artists, studio sculptors often surround themselves with fragments and bits and pieces of other works that they're working on. And that section is very much about the human body and the sort of, on the one hand, desire to strip everything away to get to the most essential sort of object as possible, but also taking bits and pieces of bodies and shapes and even geometrical designs and kind of condensing them down into things that suggest the larger thing that's not there. In this gallery, which sort of starts the show, we have artists' interests in modules and process and series, taking things that seem like sort of basic components and developing a sort of language out of repeating them and seeing how many ways that they can be varied. One of the ways in which this exhibition is also a sort of about rediscoveries is that it includes a really important work in the Nasher collection that we've never displayed here before. And this is the work behind us, Richard Serra's Inverted House of Cards. It is 4 sheets of Corten steel, an inch thick. So each plate weighs, I think, about 900 pounds. And we were understandably nervous about how to install this, and which is one reason it's been in storage for such a long time, because basically it's configured exactly like a house of cards you would build as a child. You have this central intersection and the 4 cards pinwheel out from the center. But there's nothing holding this in place. except the sheer weight, except the sheer weight of the steel. And it's part of a larger series of works called prop pieces that Richard Serra did in the late 60s that was very much just about exploring the most elemental aspects of sculpture, that often sculptors work with this material that's really heavy, that resists gravity. Okay. And if you're not trying to depict a form that's recognizable from the world, if you're just trying to deal with what this material is really about, testing it and what it can do in terms of gravity is one of the most sort of basic ways of doing so. And it's a very primal thing. I mean, this is probably Absolutely. The way people started trying to build structures without tools to begin with. But it's also, of course, this is sort of an industrial material. Once we started thinking about this as a module of 4 equal components, and it's the fact that they're equal that holds them together, we started looking at other works in the collection and thinking, well, what else do we have? And in certain cases, there are works by artists who are roughly contemporary with Richard Serra, like Richard Long or Carl Andre, where you have repeated elements like aluminum ingots or pieces of stone that are clearly also modular. And this was something artists at this period were very interested in. But artists from earlier periods also drew on, we can sort of imagine them thinking in that way. For example, the Matisse here or the Brancusi on the other side of the gallery, you have the human body being used almost as a sort of module and turned like components, and in this case 2 female figures facing 2 different directions. Or in the case of the Brancusi, this sort of perfect geometric block being almost divided in half by this embracing couple. Exactly. I mean, one of the things that I've been struck by the ARP here, which has been on view ever since I arrived. It's for a long time, but it's been on the other side. And you always approach it from sort of this way, and you see these 2 buds right away. And right now when you enter from over here, and you sort of walk around the Richard Long, you see it from the other side. You see it from the other side, and this upper bud comes into view very, very slowly. And it's, for me at least, it really changed the character of the sculpture. It seems much more lively and almost sort of uncanny. So, yeah, it has to, I think in a way we do it to satisfy ourselves first as viewers and hope we can bring everybody else along.
We want to thank Catherine for speaking with us. The exhibition is up through January 13th, 2013. More information on the exhibition can be found at NasherSculptureCenter.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your poem.